Well, we sure are getting a lot of seed catalogs in this time of year, and they're all so tempting. I find that I want to order something from each one of them.
It seems like every year I end up with a list this long of seeds I want to order, $50, $60 worth, and then I come to reality and realize I've only got a 30-foot by 30-foot garden. I just don't have room to plant 20 different varieties of cantaloupe.
Now, the reason we have all these scattered out is we'd like to give you a few tips on what we find in a good seed catalog, things that you might want to look for yourself.
Now, nursery catalogs, seed catalogs in general, are very good sources of information.
In fact, this one has an index, a germination and culture guide, all crammed into just 2 pages. There's a lot of good information here if you just know where to look for it in the catalog.
Nursery catalogs not only give you descriptions of what the variety is, very often you'll find ripening season, quality, other information, pollination requirements. Compare the same varieties between different catalogs and you'll find that you come up with a pretty good idea of what that variety is like.
And a lot of vegetable catalogs are very helpful in that at the head of every chapter on cucumbers, for instance, or sweet corn, they give you a complete rundown on how to grow the crop. Sometimes they tell you seeding rates and harvest times and everything. It's really very helpful.
One thing to watch out for, there are some excellent catalogs out there. There are also some catalogs that you need to take the claims with a grain of salt. I sort of use the rule of thumb. I discount 15 to 20% off of any claim for every exclamation point in the description. Here, for instance, pick thousands of cherries without climbing a tree. This is very true. It's a bush. They are cherries. What they don't tell you is that they're very small and they're extremely tart and not very palatable.
Here's a claim. Delicious, prolific strawberry plants, actually as big as a plum, exclamation point. Well, what they don't tell you is that there are hundreds of types of plums out there, and there are some that don't grow any bigger than the average strawberry. So you need to be wary of wild claims like that.
These blueberries, for instance, blueberries as big as quarters, and also claim the bigger the blueberry, the better the flavor, which really is not true at all. If you look down at the bottom, this is the Blu-ray variety. An excellent variety. I have no qualms about recommending that variety, but if you look at this description, you just have to realize that you can't expect it to live up to all of the claims here, even though it is an excellent variety.
Now, there are some catalogs that really like to give you a splash of color to look at, and sometimes their color enhancement goes a little too far. Here's a rhubarb that has foliage that's turquoise colored. And then here's a photograph of some blue fescue, which is a great ground cover, but they don't even show an actual photograph. It's actually a very highly color-enhanced drawing of fescue that really isn't that color at all.
2 others to look at here. These raspberries look like the one will just barely fit in size in the palm of your hand. Now, the heritage variety of fall-bearing raspberry is a good raspberry, but it won't get much bigger than the tip of your finger. So again, don't expect it to live up to your claims. Another exaggerated claim, strawberries the size of peaches, which I suppose is true if you pick out the absolute largest strawberries and get some peaches from a tree that hasn't been thinned and they're not much more than just a pit. But this is the early glow variety, an excellent variety for Oklahoma. But again, exaggerated claims.
Now, a lot of seed catalogs that come to you will be very glossy and have beautiful photographs in them. This one is a nursery catalog, and it shows the trees at full size and in full flowering, which is helpful if you're trying to select trees for your home landscape. And they have to show them that size so you know what to expect. But one thing I want you to be aware of is that when you order from a mail-order nursery, they're shipping you small trees that will transplant well when you get them and will ship well, but they're not going to look exactly like the ones in the catalog. It'll take a number of years before they grow up to that size. So just be aware of that when you order them.
Just so you don't get disappointed when a little stick arrives. Another thing, there are many excellent fully colored, fully illustrated catalogs. There are also a few, such as this one, just printed on newsprint, just black and white, but I happen to know I've ordered from these people. It's a very informative catalog, very good quality stock. Don't judge a nursery just on how glossy, how slick the catalog is. Some very good nurseries and seed companies just come on black and white newsprint stock.
Here's a vegetable catalog from down in Texas, and I like to order from these folks because it's a nursery that, or a place that has vegetable seed of varieties adapted for here. And They're not fancy. Again, they don't have bright color photos, but they have varieties that I know will grow well in the hot summers of Oklahoma.
Another thing to keep in mind, there are some companies that are strictly commercial. They only deal in large bulk lots and only to the commercial grower. There's also some companies, such as Burpee and Stark Brothers, who have both a commercial catalog for large orders, wholesale orders, and a retail catalog, which is probably what you'd be getting for smaller orders. There's also a couple that are primarily commercial varieties, but they do have a price listing in here for individual trees for the retail trade. Now, be careful when you're looking at the order form, check the ordering information, find out what the minimum order is. Don't send an order for one tree to a wholesale catalog and expect them to give you the wholesale price. If you want to find out if they have a retail small volume list, write and ask them if they have a separate catalog or price list. But don't expect wholesale prices for a retail order.
Well, also, if you're ordering vegetable seed, if you're just going to order $2 worth and there's a $3 shipping and handling charge, there's not much savings there. So watch that, because that can really run up your order in a hurry.
Now, we've been looking at general catalogs. There are specialty catalogs, such as tomatoes. There are nurseries that deal primarily in small fruits. Some specialize in blueberries, some specialize in strawberries.
In fact, some of these are extremely helpful. Here's one that gives you 50 kinds of lettuce. If you want to grow a salad garden, boy, that's a great source right there.
When you get looking through nursery catalogs, there's a few terms that may be confusing to you. When you start dealing with the tree fruits, one in particular that generally runs into problem is dwarf, semi-dwarf, and standard-sized trees. Now, as a standard-sized tree for tree fruit is one that grows on a seedling rootstock. That's what's known as a standard size. These are usually larger trees. Anything that is on a rootstock that produces a smaller sized tree is technically a dwarf. Usually if it's only about half size to 3/4 size, that's a semi-dwarf. The term dwarf by a reputable nursery is usually reserved for something that's less than half the size of a standard sized tree. Also, check carefully about pollination requirements. Good nursery catalogs will clearly state what the variety, what pollination requirements are for particular varieties and for types of fruit. One comment that I've got, there are some apple varieties listed in some catalogs that say they are self-pollinating. This is sort of true. They will set some fruit with their own pollen. For apples, I definitely recommend at least 2 varieties for cross-pollination. You'll get a better fruit set and bigger fruit from them.
Probably about the only terms in a vegetable catalog that you need to be aware of is the terms hybrid and open pollinated. If you're into saving your own seed, of course you know that you can't successfully save hybrid seed from year to year, so beware of that. Also, in tomato catalogs, they talk about determinate and indeterminate varieties. If you want a tomato that doesn't require any staking or caging, it's going to stay in bounds and be rather short, then order a determinate variety. If you want a tomato that's going to keep growing and climbing all the way up until frost, order an indeterminate variety. It will need extra support though. The last thing I want to mention is with tomato varieties, make sure that you order varieties that at least have VFN after the name. That means that they are resistant to verticillium and fusarium diseases and resistant to nematodes. Now some also have VF1, F2, N for nematodes, and also T for tobacco mosaic. So there are many disease-resistant varieties available. Make sure that you order some of those.
One term that you'll run into with the small fruits, particularly strawberries and raspberries, is the term everbearing. And this can be confusing. With strawberries, you have 3 basic types. There's the June bearing, which is all the ones that we have out at our studio garden are June bearing. These have 1 crop per year. There's another kind, the old-fashioned everbearing strawberries, which have that main June crop, and then a little smattering of berries through the summer and a smaller crop at the end of the summer. Generally, these aren't very, very highly adapted or worth growing. There's a third kind, which has just relatively recently come into the market, and that's the day-neutral strawberries. These strawberries bloom constantly and bear fruit constantly, no matter what time of year it is in the growing season. Now, very often they're listed in the same category as the old style everbearing. So you're going to have to read the descriptions very carefully to determine whether you have an actual day neutral or one of the old style everbearers, which really aren't worthwhile. If you're going to go for an everbearer, go for a day neutral. Now, raspberries, very often you'll see everbearing raspberry, which is it is a misnomer. They are fall-bearing raspberries. Normally, a raspberry takes 2 years to make a crop. You grow the cane the first year, goes through the winter, the next year bears fruit. The fall-bearing varieties, the cane grows the first year. In the fall, on the ends of those canes, it will develop flowers and give you a crop in the fall. If you left those canes, they would also give you a crop next summer, but usually it's not worthwhile. On the fall-bearing raspberries, it's better to just mow them off after harvest, after frost, and just grow new canes, just grow it for the fall crop.
Makes them easier to manage, too. One last thing, for those of y'all who live out in the Oklahoma Panhandle or the Texas Panhandle, there are seed catalogs that have varieties that are adapted to the high plains areas in very hot, dry climates. Here's one from New Mexico called Native Seed Search, and they have found varieties that were used by Indian tribes out there that they know are adapted to a hot, dry climate. So that's one you might want to look for if you live in that part of the state.
One thing you may be wondering is, how do you get on a mailing list for all of these catalogs and seed companies? And basically, if you subscribe to any sort of gardening magazine or any sort of home type magazine, you'll probably get 1 or 2 seed catalogs from the major companies. Once you start ordering and getting on mailing lists, and the mailing list gets sold and traded, you start expanding your collection. As long as you keep ordering from these other catalogs, you'll soon find that you'll have catalogs basically coming out your ears. You can also look for lists, look in magazines, send for catalogs, and it's a good idea. Many of the catalogs ask for a fee, $1, $2, to cover postage and the printing cost of the catalogs. These nice catalogs are fairly expensive to print, and if you're just writing just to find out, see what's in it, just out of curiosity, it is a good idea to send $1 along, even though it may be free, just to cover the costs.
One last thing, some of the smaller catalogs from the more regional areas are small companies just getting started, and they have a cost as well, even though it may not be a fancy catalog, but they will offer you that money back if you make an order. So that's one nice thing if you do have to send some money along for shipping and handling.